So this is Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020. This is the first edition of the KHOODEELAAR TB world exclusive diagnosis of the British media, which is identified by Fleet Street. The papers that are published from addresses in London and were once mostly published from addresses in Fleet Street, London EC4, which is only a few minutes down the road from the Strand, where the High Court is and where the BBC's Bush House address was, where it had located its World Quote Service radio propaganda operations at for decades. And it's not very far from Trafalgar Square, and which is not very far from Buckingham Palace. So just a general picture of the geography where Fleet Street is. And Fleet Street to the north of Fleet Street is, of course, the St. Paul's Cathedral. And so Fleet Street is where the main headlines appear, representing what is perceived in the Palace of Westminster or in its vicinities to be news. But it's not really based on the evidence gathered by the journalists or resulting from the investigations that are needed. Today is also the day when the Daily Times newspaper, which is the Fleet Street paper, is running the kind of trailer for a thing called Times Radio, which is on page 2 of the Times, about the Times Radio, and it is few hours after this schedule was actually published, which is a 9 o'clock live coverage of speech by Sir Keir Starmer at the virtual Labour Party conference. Now, that is today, which is Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020, and the Communist Morning Star, which we call the Morning Scar, on the weekend edition, Saturday and Sunday, the 19th and the 20th of September, had this thing on the Labour Party conference, the faces of Diana Abbott and 3 others marking the starting of the Labour Party conference. And here is the headline on the Morning Star about the asylum seekers, that asylum is not a dirty word. And that's the kind of poster that the Morning Star runs. And it is this is a kind of itsy bitsy piece. It's not really based on the recognition that the Communist Party, Morning Star, should express for the 5 different types of laws and agreements that the UK, by pursuing the racist anti-asylum kind of programs, is violating. So the Morning Star is not itself showing due recognition to the obligations under the various charters, treaties, agreements, declarations, conventions. There are 5 types of instruments, legal instruments, constitutional instruments, international law instruments that are in place, and the UK is signatory to all those 5 types, and the details are inherent in that actual signed up to documents, and the UK has been breaking those obligations. The fact that the Morning Star is presenting these persons, Diana Abbott, Ian Lavery, Paula Barker, and Mark Drakeford, as the kind of left-wing answer to Keir Starmer and the Boris Johnson. And in doing so, the fact that it is failing, it should be not running this story with this headline. It should be saying that anti-asylum seeker behavior and policies by the government is violating its international law obligations. Just like the breach of the withdrawal agreement is evident in the new bill that Boris Johnson has been pushing through Parliament. And just as he has been accused correctly of breaking the rule of law and due process and all the rest of it, so is the attack on the asylum seekers and refuge seekers is violation of those principles and values. When Boris Johnson's predecessor in post, Theresa May, stands up in Parliament and adds her voice that the particular bill that Boris Johnson is pushing is breaking the international law and Britain's reputation for due process and so on, which she summed up as the collection of values that make us great. That is the word, that great. Remember, it was Theresa May who, as Home Secretary, gave the directive and created the regime of hostile environment against migrants and immigrant people, or people of migrant kind of descent, if you like. And this was highlighted in the discussion that took place afterwards on the treatment of the people known as the Windrush generation people. Windrush generation people are actually associated with the people from the Caribbean who came in the 1950s in response to the invitation by the British government, which included Enoch Powell, that needed physical labor, cheap labor from countries like the countries in the Caribbean. And this policy was continued in the 1960s under the scheme called employment voucher. And I have discussed employment voucher. I helped hundreds of people under that scheme to get entry into the UK in the 1960s, early 1960s now. And the fact that I did that is continuously in need of being updated about the consequences, the impact of those people migrating from what is now Bangladesh, but mainly from Sylhet, and having formed and set up families and settled in the UK, whether they have continued logically to benefit themselves and their families and their kind of descendants is a question that I'm addressing continuously, constantly, and will be updating on in due course. So the Communist Morning Star is saying that rallies took place across Britain calling to support refugees. And they're saying that in echoing the Socialist Workers' Party racists, posing as the opponents of racism and saying in their banner, stand up to racism or racism. Standing up to racism is one thing. Opposing racism is another thing. Stopping racism is another thing. Ending racism is another thing. But most of those are left out of the agenda of quote protests fronted by or hijacked by the socialist workers and the other smaller and less kind of frenetic aspects of the left in this country. And there are obviously the echo of the main Fleet Street papers in this one yesterday, Monday, the 21st of September 2020. And they're saying that the Tories are wasting billions on their failures to deal with the COVID virus. But they've got a smaller piece on the side here. Is an MP, is a Labour MP, I think from Coventry, Zara Sultana, who is saying, whose latest statement, that one is, she's saying that the second wave of the virus is the Tories' fault. And later one, that we have noted yesterday, she's saying that Zara Sultana is saying that the eviction ban on the eviction proceedings should be extended for a whole year. We shall be talking about the ban on evictions quite extensively today. And here is the Morning Star is running the piece today and quoting this so-called kind of expert or medical person or scientist or whatever. He is the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, and the top scientific advisor, Sir Patrick Vallon, spoke from Downing Street, unaccompanied by Prime Minister for the first time, after infection rates rose to 6,000 people per day. Professor Whitty said that the country stands at a critical point with the current trend heading in the wrong direction as cases approximately double each week. Now there is a lot of facts missing from these kind of lead stories. First of all, the main facts that are missing and are absent, even from the Morning Star's kind of accusatory piece against Boris Johnson fronted regime, is the detail and the actual facts of on the ground, A to Z, as I have been saying. A to Z as to where the infection kind of starts and the various stages it travels until it reaches the very end, whatever the final kind of impact and the effect of the virus on the person or personnel or persons. So what are the factors that are actually involved? What are the facts of the infection and its spread and its kind of spread and the contacts? And also, when they say that there should be more tests, what are the actual factual kind of effects and from what stage of the kind of testing does the diagnosis begin or the identification begin? And are the tests acceptable in terms of scientific, objective kind of reliability? And the answer is that that is not established as being acceptable yet. There are controversies and serious disagreements among, quote, scientists, experts, and of course, politicians. So there has to be a universal kind of behavior by the media, by the government, and by the people who are on the front kind of lines of contacts with the people who are affected, likely to be affected, infected, and the ordinary public. There has to be a consistent kind of pattern of contacts and interactions. There is not one now. There hasn't been one since the infection kind of arrived in Britain or appeared in Britain. And none of the political statements, including the statements by Keir Starmer, or those made on his behalf or in his name or in the name of the Labour Party, including the piece in the weekend edition of the Morning Star, byline to Diane Abbott, there hasn't been any pattern and there has not been any credible kind of interaction or standard of interaction or the process of interaction among the parties concerned, that is the public, those who are exposed to infection and those who are already ill with the infection, and the people who are not infected, the largest majority who are not infected. So there's three people on that side, and then the media, and the media's kind of sources, which is the government and the politicians, and the other group is the so-called scientists and experts, and the others are the people who are actually opposing the measures that are being put in place or are being threatened or promised, depending on the standpoint. And there has been no interaction that can be reliably kind of visited or revisited. And there has to be established a reliably visitable and kind of identifiable set of interaction among all these parties so that we know the facts, or at least we know most of the facts, and we know the most of the facts that are in need of being known by all affected people. Now, everyone who is in the slightest kind of objective has been expressing negative opinion about the behavior of the government, Boris Johnson fronted government, referring to various turns, U-turns, short terms, longer terms, and all the inadequacies, failures, acts of negligence exhibited by Boris Johnson's regime or Boris Johnson fronted regime. Everyone has said negative things. And the most scathing from the standpoint of the quote right wing and the Brexiteering Boris Johnson side of things is the name Nigel Farage, who has said today, or who is reported today as having said that there has been callous, scandalous failure by the government over the last 6 months to deal with the COVID crisis. Now, if that is the case, then it is quite clear that the right have realized that they were kind of backing a completely incompetent, negligent, uncaring person in Boris Johnson when they supported him, backed him, to the point where it was Nigel Farage who personally took the initiative of, in effect, disbanding his Brexit party in order that Boris Johnson would get a landslide majority against the Labour Party fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, and Boris Johnson did do that. So Nigel Farage, in the kind of facts that Boris Johnson is now the occupant in number 10 Downing Street, backed by 80 plus majority in the House of Commons, is very much a unique fact that Nigel Farage alone can be kind of connected to, because nobody else took that initiative. So Nigel Farage coming to the same conclusion as most other observers have done already, that Boris Johnson has failed in the last 6 months, is a significant admission of Nigel Farage's own wrong judgment about Boris Johnson that landed the country with a government that is fronted by Boris Johnson and all the other things that have followed. So Nigel Farage is not without blame in terms of the casualties and the fate of thousands of people affected negatively, adversely, by the fact that Boris Johnson has been a failed prime minister and a failed government. And when the Times on page 2 talks about Keir Starmer telling Keir Starmer has been trailed by the racist media as telling the Labour Party members or the Labour Party to start being patriotic. Now that is an admission by Keir Starmer that he is totally unfit to be in the position of leading the Labour Party. The Labour Party has always been patriotic. It's a question, without a doubt, Labour Party has been more patriotic than any other party. So for Starmer to say that is a stunt, and it is completely irresponsible and unpatriotic for Keir Starmer to tell the Labour Party to become patriotic. The failures of the Labour Party at the election were nothing to do with the Labour Party members. The failures were to do with the absence of leadership by the Labour Party, absence of initiative by the MPs, and the widespread treachery perpetrated by large numbers of MPs who discredit the party, who discredited Jeremy Corbyn, who demonized Jeremy Corbyn for no reason at all. No facts, no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of Jeremy Corbyn. Now that is different. Jeremy Corbyn is innocent, okay, that is fine. But being innocent in the context of leading the country and getting the votes demanded and required of him to have led in the 3 years that followed, or 4 years followed the June 2016 referendum result, he should have led the party. based on the values that are now being recognized in the post kind of election time and in the light of the total abysmal failure by Boris Johnson to offer governance. So Boris Johnson should have been exposed by Jeremy Corbyn, who did not expose him. Boris Johnson should have been forensically diagnosed and scrutinized by Jeremy Corbyn, who didn't do that. Boris Johnson was not scrutinized by any of the Labour Party MPs, not anywhere near comparably as done on last Monday, not yesterday, the Monday before yesterday, by Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband spoke in the core kind of part of his speech. He spoke for, let's say, 90 seconds. But in that time, Ed Miliband exposed Boris Johnson in a way that nobody had done in the last 25 years, to his face, on the floor of the House of Commons. And that is the opinion of most observers. And the effect and the impact of that was absolutely undeniable. And I think the effect and impact of Ed Miliband's speech, lasting 90 seconds, let's say, are being kind of felt in the behavior and the decisions and the knee-jerk activities by Boris Johnson in bringing in the new measures. They're knee-jerk, they are half kind of cooked, if you like, not oven ready, half cooked. Notice the difference. Half cooked as usual, not oven ready, but the point is that all of this should have been obvious to any observer, any kind of person who looked at the behavior of Boris Johnson over the last or previous 20 years, 22 years. And Jeremy Corbyn should have been able to deliver a critique of Boris Johnson and of Jacob Rees-Mogg and of Michael Gove and of the others that constituted Boris Johnson's float. But Jeremy Corbyn never did that. Nor did Diana Abbott, nor did Ian Lavery, nor did any of the others who are now saying to one another, and especially the likes of John McDonnell saying that don't leave, meaning that those who supported McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn in the leadership should not leave the Labour Party now, they should stay. And that is the kind of line being promoted by a lot of people on the so-called left. They're missing the point because they failed. It's not that they were prevented from doing anything that they could have done and should have done, must have done, focusing on the inadequacies of Boris Johnson, unreliability of Boris Johnson, dishonesty of Boris Johnson and his cabal. Even then, even the 4 years that preceded the 12th of December 2019 election. But Corbyn didn't do it, McDonnell didn't do it, none of the others did it. They got derailed by their total inability to grab hold of the spotlight, the center of the spotlight, which is, as I have said before, and which I shall continue to say because it's absolutely based on the evidence. When Boris Johnson was running around against Theresa May and not having a focus himself, he was against Theresa May because he was driven to get to number 10 Downing Street. Whoever was his kind of hindrance or obstruction, he was going to undo them. That was the purpose. But Boris Johnson was all over the place for several years, up to the very last minute when Theresa May was ousted. And even during the so-called Conservative leadership election, hustings Boris Johnson came across as completely unreliable, incoherent, and completely dishonest and cowardly. So all of this was happening in front of Jeremy Corbyn, who should have pointed out. And as I said, Jeremy Corbyn left his house in Islington on a daily basis, let's say a few days holiday absence, etc., etc. But essentially, on the days that he left his house, he was greeted outside his house by camera crews belonging to mainly British media and probably a few American and Australian outlets. But the main media were from the British titles or British outlets. And I have said, and I'm saying again, Corbyn sprinted. Either he sprinted away from them or rushed to the car waiting, or he put on a very kind of unsmiling, let's say, unappreciative appearance as he walked very fast away from them. Now, my point is, and I've been doing all types of media-related work for a very long time, long before anyone had ever heard of Corbyn. And since before anyone, of course, heard of Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg or whatever. And the point is that Corbyn could have been misreported. If he spoke to them on those occasions, he could have been misreported on the day or, by the particular reporter or person that was covering his particular appearance on the particular date. That is true. It is possible, given the agenda that these persons were kind of pursuing on instructions. But that could have been only one aspect of his agreement to speak to them. The other aspect or aspects would have included the fact that this would have been a record, undeniable record of his speech to them. And he should have spoken about everything that was going wrong with the Tories, claiming to be the better party for the country and society. But Corbyn didn't do that. So there is no record of him stating anything against the frontrunner for the leadership of the Conservative Party or the empty agenda that he was running on. So yesterday, Corbyn was online doing a kind of call or kind of taking part in some kind of left conference yesterday. That is Monday, the 21st of September 2020, or during the weekend, whenever it was actually recorded. He was still incomplete and incompetent and still in denial because he was talking about local councils getting less money than they needed and so on. But he never talked about the local councils being unaccountable to the local communities. So that is the other thing that Corbyn has got as complete defect. Unfitness is unwillingness to see that local council employees or local councils owe the local communities accountable service, accountably high and reliable and honest and fit for purpose service. Yet Corbyn was talking about the lack of money. This is a refrain that local council lobby always says the central government doesn't give them enough money. But any examination of the local councils, kind of treatment of the money that they do get, will show a significant evidence or evidence of significant abuse of the money which they award to their directors and chief executives and others, while they cut basic services. Think about that. Corbyn never enters that territory. Corbyn never enters that territory at all, ever. Now that is fundamental unfitness on Corbyn's part, and this is his intellectual and ethical and moral kind of inadequacy. Unforgivable, unacceptable, unjustifiable, moral, ethical, and democratic deficit that is personified by Corbyn in that regard. And Corbyn does the same thing with the trade unions. He never treats the trade unions as essentially representing immediate interests of their members. He conflates the role of the trade unions with the image of trade unions as the saviors of society, or workers in the NHS as saviors of society. All these people have to work accountably, have to be seen with the context, in the context of accountability and obligation to the rest of society, not above society, or not holding society hostage in an emotional way, which is what Corbyn and his so-called left-wingers have created. The situation where these NHS nurses and NHS personnel are elevated to a point beyond justification, beyond fairness, beyond the rights of the people who are affected by the negligence, misconduct, prejudice, unaccountability by the nurses. Corbyn does not accept the possibility that nurses could be prejudiced, that nurses could be biased, that nurses could be unfit or dangerous. And the same extends to, the junior doctors, which is the group that he would support. And of course, Corbyn doesn't even talk about the consultants, not in any way that can be seen as rigorously, accessibly mentionable. So Corbyn has been an MP, let's say, just under 40 years, let's say. But he has made no significant kind of impact as an MP. He has been part of the fan club for Tony Benn, and I studied Tony Benn from very close quarters and on the evidence, not every day, but enough for the length of Tony Benn's kind of peak years as the alternative to the right-wing incumbent as leader of the Labour Party, whichever it was, whether it was Harold Wilson or Jim Callaghan or the rival Dennis Healey. Neither Healey nor Benn got to the position of being the leader of the Labour Party, but both of them are kind of overpraised by their respective fans and supporters. But whatever their fans' perception of Healey and Benn, neither made historically significant contributions to creating the narrative that the Labour Party is the only party that can serve and save and protect the UK, which is true in the case of despite all the inadequacies that I've outlined and attributed to Jeremy Corbyn, it is the Labour Party's role that has been saving this country and society so far, as compared to the Tories. But that narrative, that assertion, that commentary has not come from the Labour Party or the left. Think about this. So what we are looking at in the behavior of Keir Starmer, who is being praised by the Murdoch Times, is the signs or collection of signs for a conservative friendly leader who may get even more help. And it is quite possible that he may be in place as leader of the Labour Party when the Labour Party gets in power. It is quite possible. I would not say more than that. And so therefore, in the Times detail, Francis Eliot, political editor, saying the Starmer puts families first in bid to win back voters. Now that is a vindication of the analysis that I present and I've been representing. Why should Starmer put families first? Why should that be even a significant point to mention? Families should have been backed and supported and recognized by the Labour Party decision makers at all times, always, at every level. And it's not the families, because majority of the people in this country are not in families. They may be members of families in a kind of organizational, statistical term, but the idea of family implies deep loyalty and deep honesty and deep solidarity. That is not present in most people's lives, even when they are described as being part of families. So this is a myth. It should be more important values rather than the family. The values of integrity, solidarity, compassion, support, kindness. And that should be regardless of family membership. Because families in that way actually is based on the assumption that those who are not members of the families are enemies or somehow deserving of less kindness and solidarity and are not entitled to justice and fairness. So that is something that has to be identified in the narrative that Keir Starmer is promoting. And as I said earlier, he said that Labour Party members should become patriotic. That is a criminal lie uttered by Starmer. That suggests that the Labour Party has been other than patriotic. That never has been the case. Labour Party is the party that has been more patriotic than any other party in this country in the general mix and comparisons among parties that do exist. So the Labour Party does not need lectures from agents of the ideology of the right and the patriotic fascists, to be more patriotic. The Labour Party members are patriotic. It doesn't need lectures. And the rest of the Times is full of tittle-tattle, and there is a confession here and a confession there about the corruption in the capitalist system. For example, in this one about the Grenfell insulation sold to cladding firm at half price. This is written by somebody, unbelievably, that is the social affairs editor of the Times. How the Times can have a social affairs editor is beyond credibility, but let's see what it's saying. Insulation for the cladding system at Grenfell Tower was sold to the installer at half price, and the manufacturer then said that it wanted to make the building a case study for its product. So they were experimenting. So the massacre of the people at Grenfell Tower was also contributed to and partly plotted by the traders of the insulation. They were experimenting. So they experimented by exposing these people to mass deaths. But the Times is not going to go the whole hog and say this. It is just tickling and tinkering at the edges. It's not telling the whole truth, which is why the Times never exposes the conservative wrongdoers either in councils or when they're in government. And there is an admission by David Attenborough, the National Treasurer, that he's a chicken-eating hypocrite. He's confessing. Maybe somebody has outed him. But that is the confession, and they won't so kind of paint him as a hypocrite. They are just peddling him as still a resource national treasure. And there is this plug for the Times Radio. They're saying, join Asma Mir and Stig Abel as they help you understand what's going on in the world each morning. How dare the Times? Stig Abel and Asma Mir. What can they possibly help anyone understand about what is going on in the world? I mean, this is completely ridiculous and completely incredible. So there is this cartoon in the Times. So it is saying, more glum and wise. It's like a take on the more common wise. So more glum and wise. So we are hitting all the right numbers, but not necessarily in the right order. That is the two scientific advisor and chief medical officer being cartooned there. And this totally devout and dedicated anti-Muslim liar, Melanie Phillips, is having a go at the US Supreme Court Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she is saying that Ginsburg's legacy is showing the perils of politicizing the judicial process. Now, there is no judicial process in the USA. There has been a pretense of a judicial process, but the judicial process has not been just and fair. So for Melanie Phillips to say that the judicial process exists is in itself an untruth. And by extension, bringing it back to the colonizers, because the USA model is based on the English model, the English legal system, so-called. There is no judicial process worth speaking about in this country either. So what is this slogan, or what is this phrase in the current slogan, recent slogan, due process and rule of law? What are these about? These are continuation of the myths. But these do exist only at the atmosphere, at the kind of sphere where it is denied. If they're denied, they should exist. Due process should exist. Rule of law should exist, but they don't. I hope I have made the distinction clear. And they only exist now in relation to the charters, declarations, conventions, and founding aims and purposes of the institutions like the United Nations, which is now this particular time going through its 75th anniversary, about which in due course, more in due course. Now, the treaties and the charters and the declarations and the conventions are the ones where due process and rule of law are acknowledged. Okay? When due process or rule of law are attempted in Britain or in the USA, the particular regime that is in place or that is affected by the ruling or the process condemns it as being completely from the barbaric kind of realm or barbaric kind of tradition. Nothing to do with our great America or Great Britain. Remember, great was revived yesterday by Theresa May in the critique that she was delivering about due process and rule of law being kind of left behind or kicked out of the consideration by Boris Johnson trying to renege on the withdrawal agreement. And what they're doing in the Times about the Boris Johnson options, they're saying that there are 3 editorial opinion pieces on the Times today, page 27. They're saying under long haul, Boris Johnson has little option but to introduce further lockdown restrictions given the somber warnings of his scientific and medical advisors. And the question arises from the Times endorsing Boris Johnson. This is the question. Why has there been this return and research of the virus? What did they do wrong in the last months to cause this virus to return in this form at this rate again? So the answer should be sought. A to Z, as I've been saying, A to Z, the answer should be sought. What went wrong? What are the steps that should have been taken and weren't taken? And I tell you, one of the most telling and absolutely stunningly undeniable pieces of evidence, let's say, is the ending of the ban on proceedings to evict people. Now, this ban on eviction has been ended exactly in the week when they are talking about bringing on bans all over the place. Now that is totally, absolutely exposing the Times as idiocy. The Times should be talking about this contradiction and this undeniable, stunning piece of evidence of Boris Johnson's stupidity, dishonesty, unreliability, and negligence and lack of care. But the Times is not doing that. So the diagnosis of the media is in this as an example. Boris Johnson has exposed these additional people to severe risks from the virus. And not only that, he has resumed the eviction process against the most vulnerable people in the context. Thousands of these people who will be evicted, thrown out of their homes, are already prior to the formal rubber stamping of their attackers' kind of dream against them. They are living nightmare lives. People who are subject to eviction notices are in a state of terrible fear, uncertainty, and they're scared stiff-legged. So what is happening? The Times is in denial. Times doesn't acknowledge that at all. And that is where the failures get aggravated by the likes of Boris Johnson, because he thinks that he has got the support of the Times or the likes of the Times. So he's not all wrong. If the Times were concerned about the safety of the hundreds of thousands of people being attacked by landlords, remember the use of the landlords here is to be deemed to be being done just for the technical reason, and it should be deemed as being done here within quotation marks. Because Lord is the thing that I object to, and it is unacceptable. There is no Lord. So the landowners, let's say, the freeholders, a much better word would be the freeholder or the leaseholder or whoever controls the tenancy, let's say. whoever controls the tenancy and whoever has the permission from the court system to issue an eviction notice and to seek eviction against a particular person or a group or a family. So the second one is the decision by Boris Johnson's government to keep trains running during the crisis. And the third editorial is Jack Harn, who is the industrial, is saying, the memory of the peerless Sir Stanley Matthews, playing professional football into his 50s, has sustained many a greying Sunday League fanatic in their conviction that their day at Wembley may yet to come. But those who worry that the onward march of the age might put paid to sporting ambition ought to instead heed a more recent and altogether more impressive example. At 97 years of age, few of the fixtures of the life Jack Harn lived in the industrial Northumberland of the 1950s survive. His old workplace, the docks at North Shields, has long fallen silent. His Second World War regiment lost to posterity. Yet his passion for judo, the last link to his lost youth, endures. After nearly 7 decades of practice, this month Mr. Harn, a black belt, hopes to be awarded his 10th Dan grade, the ultimate accolade for any devotee of the martial arts, known to Japanese as the gentle way. So this is a kind of cultural celebration that most people would be okay about reading, but there is no reference to the serious crisis, which is more serious in the context than the crisis posed by the virus, the pandemic, which is the rest of the list of the illnesses that people suffer from, serious illnesses that people die of every year or every day or every week. The Times doesn't put that in context, and it doesn't mention that, as it also ignores the fact of the judicial system. There is no judicial system, there is no justice system, and when the courts are allowed to resume their role of rubber stamping the eviction applications, the courts are only doing what they have been allowed to do for decades, which is to target the parties at the receiving end of eviction notices and applications. And the courts are against the poor people, and the courts are, if you like, presided over and chaired by and led by and dominated by members of the judiciary, junior rank judges, but they are members of the judiciary nonetheless, who are prejudiced, biased, ignorant, and absolutely racist. This is based on fact and evidence. And there is no room for anyone saying that the hundreds of thousands of people who are going to be evicted and are already subject to the notices of eviction, which is the nightmare notices, have been given any consideration or understanding by the rest of society, where there should have been able to get care, solidarity, support. There is none. So this last week, I think the Guardian or the Guardian group has referred to Ruxana Fiaz, Newham Council, Mayor of Newham Council, elected mayor, executive mayor of Newham Council. Now, in the interview on a kind of subsidiary kind of channel, which is not a mainstream channel, it's an ethnicity linked channel, which is itself defunct now as a channel, Roxana Fiers gave a spiel aired live on the 12th of March 2018. Now, that was literally days before she got officially adopted as the candidate for the Labour Party in Newham to stand against Robin Wales, because Wales was the other candidate and he was knocked out and she got adopted. We have published, the KHOODEELAAR campaign has published extensively about Roxana Fiers, about that. But what we have not published and we have not said up to this minute is that in that interview, so-called, or this spiel, Roxana Fiers got several basic facts wrong. First of all, she said that Robin Wales had been in elected mayor post since 2012. Think about that. 2012 is 10 years different from the actual date or the year that he started becoming the occupant of the post of elected mayor. That was 2002. And yet Roxana Fiers said that, and the presenter of the so-called channel didn't even notice it. Nor did her main promoter, co-appearing with her on that kind of program, notice it. So they didn't notice it, they didn't correct it. Nor did Roxana Fiers, because she must have heard herself saying 2012. And she didn't come back and say that, look, I got that wrong, I'm sorry. Why am I saying this? Because in that same series of spins, if you like, and spiels, Roxana Fiers made a number of claims about what she would do to help the people of Newham if she got adopted as the candidate for the Labour Party and then if she got elected. Both of the things did happen, and there was hardly any other likelihood of any other outcome, given the record of Newham as a community, the record of Newham Labour Party, and the record of the behavior of the leadership of the Labour Party at the time, which was up to April this year, which was Jeremy Corbyn. And although there have been various fact-based, truthful assertions that Roxana Fiers was not a Corbynite or a left-winger, whatever. But in that spin, she did refer to Jeremy Corbyn, and she did clearly give him credit for the fact that the Labour Party, at the date 12th of March 2018, was Europe's biggest political party. And she directly gave credit for that size and that number of membership of the Labour Party to the program that Jeremy Corbyn was fronting. So what she did in that spin on the 12th of March 2018 was that she made a number of promises, serious promises about breaking away from the record of failures by Robin Wales on housing. Now, in the next part, which is part B, we shall be dealing exclusively, again, with the lies that Roxana Fiers has been telling and the denials of her undertaking on that date since she took over at the beginning of May 2018. So this is the end of the world exclusive diagnosis of the Fleet Street newspapers of Tuesday, the 22nd of September 2020. 22nd of September is also coincidentally the day before the anniversary of the collapse of the ceiling in that property owned by the Royal London Hospital. That was September. That's the anniversary. September is the anniversary of the collapse of the ceiling in a property in Stepney that was owned by the Royal London Hospital. That was September 1987.